Ever reached for a box of Oreos or bag of chips after a tough day? Of course you have. Maybe you even do it from time to time. Of course you do. It's totally understandable. We know from previous research and our own experience that emotions can drive people to eat highly processed foods. Because when you're feeling crappy, it seems like something indulgent will make you feel better, at least temporarily. That's why a new study published in Appetite is so interesting. The scientists attempted to quantify just how much of an emotional boost people got from eating highly processed foods. The researchers used data from 84 young adults who logged their food intake and emotions for 4 days. The findings: participants experienced a 4 to 5% increase in positive emotions immediately after eating highly processed foods. If that sounds pretty inconsequential, hang on. That was the researchers' first reaction too, but then they put some fascinating context around it. My name is Jeremy Colon, and this is Dark Side of Fitness, Episode 9. Before we get started, I want to provide the actual definition of highly processed foods. These are foods that are scientifically engineered to be irresistible, often due to a combination of carbohydrates, fat, and sodium, along with various other flavors and texture enhancers. How the study worked. The researchers wanted to find out how positive and negative emotions were impacted by eating highly processed foods. So they looked at what participants' emotions were like immediately afterward, 1 hour later, and 3 hours later. Why did they compare 1 hour to 3 hours? Past research has shown that blood glucose levels rapidly decline between 2 and 4 hours after eating, and that drop has been associated with negative emotions like irritability and nervousness. Researchers' insights. Okay, so the 4 or 5% increase in positive emotions immediately after eating highly processed foods seem like MBD. But the researchers did some digging. By comparison, intravenous intake of about one standard drink of alcohol was similarly associated with about a 5% increase in positive emotions. Intravenous intake of a small dose of cocaine was associated with about a 10% increase in positive emotions. When you think about it that way, the emotional effects of eating highly processed foods suddenly seem a whole lot more significant. Hey, they're not exactly cocaine-like, but still. The scientists also noted that since highly processed foods seem to give us a temporary emotional boost, it makes sense that people continually reach for them. It's that whole self-reinforcing feedback loop thing. So what does this all mean? Well, because the association between highly processed food intake and emotions were relatively small and didn't last all that long, people may repeatedly crave and then eat highly processed foods without the day to maintain positive emotions. More research is needed to confirm this idea, but perhaps it sounds relatable? Let's do some more digging. Why the lab isn't always the best place to study emotional eating. You probably know that eating studies done in labs have their advantages, unlike this study which was done in the quote-unquote real world. After all, when you can actually watch the participants eat, you know exactly what's going on into their mouths. And since people tend to misreport or misremember what they ate, that's a pretty big advantage. But as the authors of this paper point out, studying emotional eating in a lab comes with its own particular downsides. First, it's hard to replicate real-life feelings in a lab. That means it's tricky to study how people eat in response to certain emotions. Watching a video that's meant to make you stress won't produce exactly the same feeling as, say, a particular frustrating phone conversation with your good-for-nothing brother. No offense, Jordan. Second, some people change their eating habits when they're being watched, and this can happen consciously or unconsciously. If the researchers are trying to understand how emotions impact and how food impacts emotions, participants who are extra careful about what they eat in front of others probably won't be a great source of data. Plus, most studies in a lab setting are limited to measuring people's emotional responses for just an hour for practical reasons. And how you feel 1 hour after a binge could be quite different from how you feel 3 or 6 hours later. So yes, food studies in a lab are generally preferred with high quality. But when it comes to learning more about emotional eating, collecting data from people in their everyday living environment can be helpful, even though it has its limitations. So here are some coaching takeaways. Number 1, food impacts emotions. This type of research is hard to draw strong conclusions from, but most people don't need bulletproof data to acknowledge that what we eat affects how we feel emotionally, and as a result, may drive unwanted behaviors. That said, it can sometimes be hard to connect the dots for yourself. That's where you find great coaches and people who can really help you with this. Number 2, highly processed foods might give us a temporary boost, and that can make it much harder to enjoy them in moderation. When someone feels out of control around certain highly processed foods, explaining this can help them understand, 1, it's not all their fault. 2, lots of people struggle with these types of food. And 3, there's a way to break the cycle. And that's through help and support and everything that a coach can provide you with. Number 3, signs of food addiction may be more effective. It's also worth noting that while lots of people struggle with highly processed foods, some may show signs of a more serious problem. This includes needing to eat processed foods in order to feel a certain way, pleasure, energy, or excitement, or to relieve negative emotions, physical pain, or fatigue, experiencing withdrawal-like effects when they're not eating, spending so much time thinking about food that it crowds out the other parts of their life. These may be signs of food addiction, and you can also view the graph above to get a better idea of how food addiction compares to other eating behaviors. With that being said, it's best to bring attention to these tendencies around highly processed foods and what might be driving them. In turn, that might help someone shift their decision making around food. And if someone is really struggling, they can seek out a qualified mental health practitioner so they can support them while they get the help and guidance they really need. So, these are my thoughts. Processed foods, specifically highly processed foods, can be one hell of a drug in the sense that if you have a sweet tooth, if you have foods that you crave, right? They can all really be affected by your emotions. Your emotions are the driving force to pretty much everything. How you feel throughout the day affects everything. Your mood, your behavior, your actions, you're working out, etc. You get the picture, right? Figuring out what is that food that triggers you the most and finding other ways to either replace it, substitute it, or just move it is the best way to go about it, right? Sometimes we fall into, a very deep rabbit hole when A, we don't speak up when we need the help. B, we don't find qualified health professionals like a dietitian or some sort of psychologist who deals with food addiction or anything of that nature. And then 3, creating some sort of support system, whether you find a workout buddy, you find groups where you can hear other people's stories, where you can talk and just hear from others and find some sort of solution that can best fit you. A lot of us do have goals. A lot of us wants to feel healthy, feel lighter, do so many amazing things, but the food intake is probably the number one issue everybody struggles with. Even if it's the most obvious thing, it's also the hardest thing to really grasp and to fine tune it and to make it as customizable and make it fit into one's lifestyle. So I say this with a grain of salt, that it's always good to identify your sweet spots with sweets or foods that don't best serve you. And I'm not saying completely eliminate them, but have them in moderation. You know, ask yourself, do I really need to eat all this? Do I really need to have this? And don't get me wrong, every once in a while, by all means, enjoy your favorite bag of chips, your bag of gummies, or you know, whatever it is, you can enjoy it, but make sure you take care of business first. And what I tell my clients is an 80-20 rule. You know, majority of your diet, you should follow 80% of the time. The 20% is that flexibility, right? That flexibility where you can go out with your friends, you can eat with your significant other, you can enjoy what you want. Maybe go to your favorite breakfast spot, but you have to make sure that that week, right, you zoom out. 80% of the time, you're following your routine. You're eating the best foods as best as you can. You're working out to the best of your abilities. You're sleeping, right? You're keeping your stress levels down, right? You're making sure you're not, when I'm going back to eating, you're making sure that you're not overeating in calories, right? And the best thing about it is, if you can always plan ahead of time. If you know you're gonna go out, if you know you want to eat something really good and it's high in calories, because that innate calories is what matters the most, right? Plan your days accordingly. If you want to go out to the bar, enjoy some nachos and some chips and some wings with some friends, that is perfectly fine. But make sure that your calories throughout the day reflect, so that way you can allow yourself to enjoy the meals without feeling like you're putting yourself off a track or feeling depressed or of that nature. But like the article mentioned, and I also agree with it, if you are struggling, if you are having a moment of weakness and you feel like you can't shake it off, speak up. Ask somebody. Ask someone who's qualified, who's professional, who can really help you. Join support groups. The thing about it is, we have all the tools and resources to put us in a position where we can win. So, thank you again for watching this video. Thank you again for viewing it. Please like, subscribe, comment, and see you at the next one. Take care.